Once upon a time, in a corn country, there lived a very beautiful girl, and her name was Rindercella. Now Rindercella lived with her muggly other and two sad blisters. And in this same corn country, there was a very pransome hince. And this pransome hince was going to have a bancy fall, and he invited people from riles a mound, especially the pitch people. Rindercella's muggly other and her two sad blisters went out to buy some drancy fesses to wear to this fancy fall. But Rindercella could not go, because all she had to wear were some old ruddy dags. Finally, the night of the bancy fall arrived, and Rindercella couldn't go. So she just cat down and scried. She was kittin' there a-scryin', when all at once there appeared before her Gary Fodmother, and he touched her with his wagic mand. And there appeared before her a sig boach and hicks white sources to take her to the bancy fall. Now she said to Rindercella, Rindercella, you must be home before midnight, or I'll turn you into a tumpkin. When Rindercella arrived at the bancy fall, the pransome hince met her at the door, because he had watched him behind a wooden window. And Cinderella and the pransome hince danced all night until midnight. And they lell in fove. And finally, the mid-clock struck night, and Rindercella staced down the rares, and just as she beached the rottum, she slopped her dripper. The next day, the pransome hince went all over the corn country, looking for the beautiful girl who had slopped her dripper. Finally, he came to Rindercella's house. He tried it on Rindercella's muggly other, and it fittin' did. Then he tried it on her two sigly esters, and it fittin' did. Then he tried it on Rindercella, and it fit did. It was exactly the sight rise. So they were married and lived heavily ever hapwards. Now the story of the Maury is this. If you ever go to a bancy fall and want to have a prancing hince fall in love with you, don't forget to slop your dripper.
All right, this fairy tale is called The Queen Bee, and it's from Grimm's Fairy Tales. Two king's sons who sought adventures fell into a wild, reckless way of living and gave up all thoughts of going home again. Their third and youngest brother, who was called Whitling and had remained behind, started off to seek them, and when at last he found them, they jeered at his simplicity and thinking that he could make his way in the world, while they, who were so much cleverer, were unsuccessful. But they all three went on together until they came to an anthill, which the two eldest brothers wished to stir up, that they might see the little ants hurry about in their fright and carrying off their eggs. But Whitling said, "Leave the little creatures alone. I will not suffer them to be disturbed." And they went on farther until they came to a lake where a number of ducks were swimming about. The two eldest brothers wanted to catch a couple and cook them, but Whitling would not allow it and said, "Leave the creatures alone. I will not suffer them to be killed." And then they came to a bee's nest in a tree, and there was so much honey in it that it overflowed and ran down the trunk. The two eldest brothers wanted to make a fire beneath the tree, that the bees might be stifled by the smoke, and then they could get all the honey. But Whitling prevented them, saying, "Leave the little creatures alone. I will not suffer them to be stifled." At last the three brothers came to a castle where there were in the stables many horses standing, all of stone, and the brothers went through all the rooms until they came to a door at the end, secured with 3 locks, and in the middle of the door a small opening through which they could look into the room. And they saw a little gray-haired man sitting at a table. They called out to him once, twice, and he did not hear. But at the third time he got up, undid the locks, and came out. Without speaking a word, he led them to a table loaded with all sorts of good things, and when they had eaten and drunk, he showed each to his bedchamber. The next morning, the little gray man came to the eldest brother, and beckoning him, brought him to a table of stone, on which were written 3 things directing by what means the castle could be delivered from its enchantment. The first was that in the wood under the moss lay the pearls belonging to the princess, 1,000 in number, and they were to be sought for and collected. And if he who should undertake the task had not finished it by sunset, if but 1 pearl were missing, he must be turned to stone. So the eldest brother went out and searched all day, but at the end of it he had only found 100, just as was said. The table of stone came to pass, and he was turned into stone. The second brother undertook the adventure next day, but it fared with him no better than with the first. He found only 200 pearls and was turned into stone. And so at last it was Whitling's turn, and he began to search in the moss, but it was a very tedious business to find the pearls, and he grew so out of heart that he sat down on a stone and began to weep. As he was sitting thus, up came the Ant King with 5,000 ants, whose lives had been saved through Whitling's pity, and it was not long before the little insects had collected all the pearls and put them in a heap. Now the second task ordered by the table of stone was to get the key of the princess's sleeping chamber out of the lake. And when Whitling came to the lake, the ducks whose lives he had saved came swimming and dived below and brought up the key from the bottom. The third task that had to be done was the most difficult, and that was to choose out the youngest and loveliest of the 3 princesses as they lay sleeping. All bore a perfect resemblance to each other, and only differed in this, that before they went to sleep, each one had eaten a different sweetmeat, the eldest a piece of sugar, the second a little syrup, and the third a spoonful of honey. Now the queen bee of those bees that Whitling had protected from the fire came at this moment, and trying the lips of all 3, settled on those of the one that had eaten the honey, and so it was that the king's son knew which to choose. Then the spell was broken, everyone awoke from stony sleep and took his right form again. And Whitling married the youngest and loveliest princess and became king after her father's death. The end.
The Really Ugly Duckling. Once upon a time, there was a mother duck and a father duck who had 7 baby ducklings. 6 of them were regular-looking ducklings. The 7th was a really ugly duckling. Everyone used to say, "What a nice-looking bunch of ducklings," all except that one. Boy, he's really ugly. The really ugly duckling heard these people, but he didn't care. He knew that one day he would probably grow up to be a swan and be bigger and look better than anything in the pond. Well, as it turned out, he was just a really ugly duckling, and he grew up to be just a really ugly duck. The end.